Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Science of Business podcast. Today, my guest is Professor Florence Honoré from Wisconsin School of Business. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Radek. I'm really excited to be spending like 45 minutes talking about research with you today.
45 minutes sharp. Exactly. So, the topic today is founding members' experience. We will be talking about how to shape a team that will drive business success. And summer is coming for many of us. So, a great time to meet with our friends, with our colleagues, and maybe think about some new business ventures. So, whom to involve, whom not to involve, that's the topic for today. And to start with a little bit of a warm up, I wonder where did your interest in this topic and founding members' experience come from? How did you come up that this is an important topic to research?
Yes. So I would say I started maybe at a more of a macro level. So I was interested in understanding how some regions can revive their economy and also maybe change the industrial landscape, go from those older industries to like newer tech, newer industries. And so, of course, one way of doing that, it's by having a high level of entrepreneurial activity. So then, of course, is the questions: who are going to be those entrepreneurs? And often, when you think of new technologies, they don't do it alone. They typically do it in teams. So no, so basically that topic makes sense. In the same time, I'm also interested in understanding mutual selection. So we, sometimes think, oh, there is a founder and they're going to pick their co-founders, but the co-founders also have to be interested. So it's really mutual. Some people like to talk about marriage or use marriage as an analogy. I think that's maybe a little too much, but still there is this mutual selection aspect. And yeah, that's something methodologically that I'm interested in. So I thought it was a good basically mix of context and method for my research.
That's really interesting. I wonder, like, when you've said about this mutual agreement and interest in the project, I realized, like, I've been doing a lot of things, a lot of events, like co-writing books, articles, and so forth. And usually, whenever I ask someone, they already said yes, even without explaining. And I, I wonder,
Mhm.
how much persuasion, how much of common sense decision was it, or maybe there are some other factors. So I'm really looking into what you will be sharing later on. So the major article I want to discuss is the one that you published in Academy of Management Journal, which was in like could you I cannot recall now. It was 6,000 startup teams that you were
Mhm.
analyzing. If you could tell us a bit more about the background of that research.
Yes, yes, of course. Okay, so to do my research, I use secondary data. So that means I don't collect the data myself. I use data that has been collected by organization, institutions. So in this case, I worked with a large data set coming from the US Census Bureau. So,
Mhm.
by the way, I should give a short disclaimer saying everything I say about my research does not necessarily represent the view of the US Census Bureau. So, that's one of the conditions when you use that data that you have to implement. So, basically, the advantage of working with an institution like the US Census Bureau is that you have access to millions of observations. But for it to make sense in my research project, I decided to focus on technology manufacturing industries. And because of the scope of the data, I looked at the startups created in the early 2000s. And so basically, then I'm able to identify past work experiences of the founders and then also observe a few years after the startup is created to make sure that, to look if the startup survives. So so I end up with this like really large sample. I think it's important when we study entrepreneurship to also make the distinctions between incorporated businesses, which are all the businesses in my study. They're incorporated and they have hired at least one employee. So that's
Mhm.
kind of the conditions to be in that data set. Maybe we can talk a little bit later about unincorporated businesses. But so that's how I get my sample. And something else I could mention. Yes,
I
so go ahead.
Yeah. So I wonder, like, one thing I wanted to comment, like, which is pretty cool, just for all the science geeks, is that so you have, like, based on the data you collected, you actually can do a longitudinal study, even though you do it only in one moment. You analyze the data that was collected over years by the organization, which is
Mhm.
really valuable, I think, because that's what we are interested in, how things are changing in time. And like, to close the background and to go into the essence, I wonder, so, like, what were you specifically searching for? What were the research questions or the hypothesis you had?
Mhm. Okay, so let me start with kind of the overall. So the overall topic is understanding how the human capital of the founders is going to be related to some startup outcomes.
Hmm.
And in terms of outcomes, I look at survival, but also at hiring of their first managerial employees. Now, when I say human capital, it consists of knowledge, skills, um, ability. And in my case, I think we mentioned that, or you mentioned that already. I looked at the human capital that those founders have accumulated in their work experiences. Because you can also gain a lot of human capital at school, for instance. But in this case, I focus on their work experiences.
Hmm.
So basically, the work experiences of founders is going to have an impact on the survival of their startup, or at least that's what I want to test.
Hmm. Okay, and just one more question about it. So, this work experience, what kind of data did you have
Mhm.
available? Or was it their prior employees, their job titles, or?
Yes, so it's mainly the employer that they work for, and it's secondary data, so it's really large, but the variables can be quite rough. So it's simply if the previous employers are like established firms and in which industry they belong to. So to which industry they belong. Unfortunately, in that data set, I don't have the title.
Well, but that's already a lot, and I think the sample size compensates for
Yes.
the.
Yes, and the
Variables.
advantage is I have the whole population. I don't have to. So within the industries that I chose, I have the whole population.
Oh wow, yeah, that's something. So, probably one of the reasons why it was published in IMJ. Um, so, going to the nitty gritty details, to the
Mhm.
practical outcomes. What were the things that surprised you in this research that you found especially interesting for people
Yes, yes.
that want to start the startup?
Mm. Okay, so I can say maybe a few words about prior work. So prior work, so scholarly work, have shown that people who worked together in the past, once they create a startup, they tend they tend to do better. So in my case, it means they tend to survive longer. But what I noticed, and that's I think the key result in this paper, is that if they can also include in the team someone who has a variety of work experiences over a relatively short period of time. So maybe you can think of job hoppers, people
Mm-hmm.
who change jobs quite often. If they can include yeah, that type of founder in the team, the startup is going to survive like even longer. So that's can maybe be like the dream team in this context is to have well, let's say a job hoppers who bring the experience variety and so likely the knowledge variety, and have at least two co-founders who have worked together before. So that means that they share some knowledge and they also share some routines. They basically have some ideas like how to set up the task, how to set up the activities to make sure that the startups get rolling. While on the other hand, the person with the diversity of or variety of experiences is going to bring some knowledge components, knowledge elements that should be new to the other co-founders. And typically also the people who change jobs quite often, they tend to play more like devil's advocate. Most likely they were not so happy in their prior jobs either. So they might basically be poking a little bit, but which I think is helpful when you have those people who might be a little set in their habits. And again, because I'm focusing on technological manufacturing, it's a place where you need to innovate. So that type of combination basically work well.
Okay, so that's the prior research. That's the world before your
No, no, no. So what I'm telling you, adding those founders with the variety of experience, that's the new result.
all right. All right.
So the prior work is simply okay. People who worked together before, um, yeah, they have that advantage. They basically know how to work with each other. They know how the industry world works in their area. But now adding that person, that if you wish, some kind of disruptor, can bring them even further along on the startup path.
that that is surprising in some ways. Like what I would assume is that these job hoppers, people who tended to switch regularly, would also find the startup boring and switch from it, not giving it enough time to grow.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, there is that element too. So we can discuss that a little bit. So other prior work has shown that those job hoppers, usually when they start their own business, they tend to commit longer than when they were simply an employee of an established firm. The other argument also we can make is that even if they leave after a few years, typically when you are a founder or even an early employee, what you did for the startup is going to have a lasting effect. So even if you're not there that long, the track that you put the startup on, is likely to last, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the imprinting effect argument.
Probably
So
that's how, like, when I think about our startup arena, like there are certain people who just keep on starting new enterprises and then move on after a few years. I do have even few
yeah.
friends who do that. I think maybe that's what they contribute. So this new perspective and the collective knowledge
Mhm.
they got from the previous.
So yeah, so I think so. What you refer to is the serial entrepreneurs, and that's a question I had in my paper too. Is
Mhm.
oh, maybe they are simply serial entrepreneurs. So what I did in the test is I excluded all the serial entrepreneurs and only kept the people who accumulated the variety of experiences in established firm, and the
Mhm.
results still hold. So it means it was not just driven by those serial entrepreneurs. You could still have that basically serial experiences in established firm and have play an important role in the startup.
That's really cool, and I have some small aspiration. Maybe we can we can start at least in here. So,
Mhm.
from what I was hearing from you is that there should be at least two co-founders that have some prior working experience together, and one that has also some experience from multiple companies, established firms in the past. Is there any other ingredient, anything else that you discovered either in
Mhm.
your research or in the prior one to add
Okay.
to the recipe for a
Yes,
successful
yes. Okay, so something interesting is that a lot of those startups, they're started by only two people. So then you wonder, how is that going to work? So in this case, it can also work if so those two co-founders work together, maybe only for 1 or 2 years, and one of them had that accumulations of jobs. Now, when you think of
Mm,
the discussion, it's all, I mean, within the startup, it's almost like that person will have to play two roles. So the roles where they know how to work with their co-founders and how to set up things, but they still have to draw on their past experiences to be able to bring that variety or that disruption. So yeah, so it's still possible in that case. The other important result is that a team that consists only of those founders with a variety of experiences, job offers, if you wish, they're going to do really bad. So they're going to fail really quickly. So basically, it's helpful to have some variety of experiences, but just that, it's going to be really complicated for the startup to survive. So yes, does that make sense? So like a lot
yeah,
of
but
developers trying to start something together, they're likely to fail quickly.
but yeah, but the thing is that they also didn't work together, right? Like
Mhm.
if as long as they also work together, this would increase some chances in into success.
Correct. Yes. So it's a fine balance.
Yeah, that's very valuable. Like what we sometimes tend not to do as scientists or science promoters is that we don't tell what the research is not saying, or what what are
Mhm.
the alternatives that are not proven. And I think we can also dive a little bit deeper into that. So like if there is any other things that we might think have an influence on the collaboration, but maybe there is no evidence, or the evidence is against those practices.
Yes, I mean, so something else kind of in that spirit, something else I can add is I also run some tests with what I call the outsiders. So there are those founders who don't have prior shared experience with the co-founders, and they had a job in, so basically in another organizations for a while. So without
Mm,
having changed jobs over time, and they don't bring that like beneficial impact. So I think they don't, like, it's not like they create issues, but they don't bring that variety, and
yeah.
so basically they're not I mean,
I'm
again,
seeing it as
in
significant.
this context, and again, it's
Mhm.
for survival. I think for other outcomes, it might be
Yeah. So
a little bit
i-
different.
if I understood right, these are the people who um, at the same time work in the startup and in another company, or
Oh, no, sorry. So before they worked in another company, then they joined the founders who had prior shared experience together.
Mhm.
And they basically kind of neutral. They're not going to help with survival, but they're not going to um, create issues either. So they just don't have that positive effect like the job hoppers would have in that
Okay.
case.
So So two things to focus on during the summer when we will be talking with friends. Like one, to spot this person who is always switching jobs as a potential candidate to our startup, and then to look around our company and our colleagues who could be our co-founder. And then the three is the optimum or minimum in terms of.
So I mean, yeah, you know, the way I explain it there, you think it would be three. It doesn't have to be three people. You know, you can maybe have a few different colleagues that you want to work with, and maybe even one of your colleagues was some kind of job hoppers before. So I don't have like a magic number. It's just the idea of having basically you want to start with some shared knowledge, share routines, you know how to work together, and then um, if you're in some kind of, you know, innovative or technological environment, have that person who can bring the variety.
Mhm.
Yes, so but I think what's important to talk about is when, you know, when selecting those individuals, and also you they also need to want to work with you, is that it always helps if you know how they work. And I think that's why prior colleagues tend to do well.
Mhm.
There are also a few startups started by university mates or college mates. Again, the advantage is that you might have worked on team projects together for classes. You know how they work. Of course, the stakes are different than for a new business, but still, it's basically you picked up on those cues uh, in like how they are
Mhm.
in the team environment. If you want to bring someone that you never worked with before, I would say it's important to maybe even have some kind of like test period, or maybe a test project, that you get a good sense. Okay, is this going to work? So when I interview some entrepreneurs for my research, I talked to a few people who knew the industry quite well and were really good at developing the product. Then they added some people who had experience, let's say, in marketing or manufacturing.
Mhm.
And those were recommended by their extended network, basically. So they didn't know those people quite well, but it was, you know, an indirect ties. And there were quite a bit of friction, and I think they didn't really had any clue what was the working mode of those people they were bringing in. And in one case, they were able to work their differences and it went fine. In the other case, they actually had to split.
Mhm.
So that's why I think it's important to I think we can be creative in the way we organize the teams at the very beginning, and, you know, maybe even work with someone. You could say, hey, maybe let's start as you would be like a contractor. Maybe I can pay you for a few hours. And if it works well, okay, then we become co-founders. You know, don't always have to go so fast and promise, oh, you'll be a co-founder, so you'll have equity and all that. Like, make sure you have that test period for the team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to jump to another question, but you got me curious with one more thing. So you mentioned there are some university colleagues, university friends who
Mhm.
worked on some projects that started teams, and there are some coworkers who do the same. And I wonder, because I think you had this data available. So did you check if general prior work experience in terms of years of working on the job market do also influence the success rate of startups? Because what I can imagine, like
Mm,
when you mentioned university project, it's been a while for me.
mm,
So but back in the days, we worked totally different than now in the business field. Like even the people who were super lazy at university,
mhm.
after some practice in business, they got, got responsible. Maybe also they developed as people. So I wonder if, like, if there is any correlation between the prior work experience and startup success. If we, the middle age or older people, can also have chances to start a startup that will succeed.
Yes, so I think so too. So most, when you look across different data sets, so most new ventures, they actually started by, people who have quite a bit of work experience. So the,
Mm.
yeah, so if there are some, so okay, so for instance, if you look at the patent inventors or scientists, usually they have some work experience before they launch. So they're more like middle age, like you would say. Mm. Now we have some examples coming from universities. Yeah, I mean, I think you raised a good point. Some people really change between university time and work employment time. Maybe, I don't know, like it's not really my area, but some organizational behavior scientists or maybe psychologists would say that there are some clues or cues that you could pick them on that should be there, even if some of their attitude change once they're part of the workforce. Yeah, I think it's a little bit tricky. Maybe, as you said, you have to reassess. So kind of go again into like that test period. Yeah, did I answer your question? Was there maybe another part or?
Yeah, but with the first sentence, because you surprised me that the majority of startups launch with people having prior experience. Like,
Mhm.
the media and what we see on LinkedIn, what
Mhm.
we see promoted, Forbes 25 under 25 and
Mhm.
so on. Like, there is so much
Yeah.
promotion of over like youth, inexperienced people starting their own businesses, that it feels like this is the only reality. And, and thank you
No,
for
no. So it's not,
clarifying that.
if you look at any data set that representative of, sometimes of the whole population, but sometimes of, a group of people, let's say like engineers or scientists, now you see that usually they have few years of experiences. And if you think of, I know people like to think of Facebook and Microsoft and created by college dropouts, but there are a lot of examples of people who leave their employers together and create their new company. So you can think of YouTube. So the three founders worked together at PayPal before.
Mm.
An old example is the three founders of Intel. They worked together at Fairchild before. So if you think of semiconductors, so yeah, I think that's always the problem with examples. People focus on just one
Yeah.
or two.
All right. I think we covered well the topic of the startup founding team, but then you also mentioned to me before that you took the subsample of people who hired the first employees, and there was some
Yes.
interesting results. If you could also tell about this.
Yes. I started with the 6,000 startups, as you said. Then I have a subsample of 1,000 who survive at least 1 year, and then the founding team is able to hire like a managerial employee. And as we said earlier, I don't observe the job title, but I use the level of wages. So I can tell that they're likely to be managers. And so what I find there is it's basically around the industry experience. So founding teams that have industry experience, so that means that they have worked in the industry of the startup. So let's say practically you want to launch a new car model and you worked before in the car manufacturing industry, that's a good signal. So it's a good signal to convince someone at a managerial level to join you. Now, that might not happen for everyone. So Another signal that those people can use, it's actually the size of the founding team. So let's say you have zero experience in car manufacturing, but you have really a cool design, a great idea, and you were able to already bring in a few co-founders. That number might convince a manager to join you, because the idea is like, oh, if they were already able to convince that many people, even if they don't have industry experience, there must be something behind that idea. Does that make sense? So it's basically the two main signals that the founding teams can use to attract the managers. Now, on the manager side, typically they need to have some kind of industry experience for the startup to recruit them. So let's maybe take your example. So you don't really want to be a founder, but you would like to be an early employee of a startup. It might be really difficult for you to convince them to hire you if you don't have experience in the specific industry, in the area of the startup. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
here I'm talking about those joiners. I don't know if you heard that wording before. So it's, yeah, basically people really interested in working in startups. They don't want to take the financial risk early on to invest their own money, but they want to be there early on. So they want to be those joiners, those early employees. And I think it's quite, possible, but you have to have industry experience in the area of the startup. So yeah, so that's basically the match, the mutual selection I observe in this um, in this case. And when I also talk with some founders, look at examples, I think it works well when the founders can hire or bring in actually a team that work together as their early employee. So for instance, I can give you a specific example. I use actually in the AMG article. So the Icon aircraft, it's a new type of planes that you can fold, put on a trailer, drive somewhere. So try to basically make flying more accessible to people. So the two founders, they were able to bring in like a whole team of engineers from an aerospace manufacturer. So you can see that they might have had kind of the design idea. It's completely different. Usually you imagine a plane, you imagine something huge, you need an airport basically. And there they had like the new idea, new concept. But of course, for the realization, you need to be able to convince that team of, in their case, engineers that are in that industry.
I wonder about this part, about, because it is really appealing. I never thought of it. Like, usually we think, when recruiting, we think about a person and not that frequently about the entire team. I wonder how to spot such a team, like how to that, like, the easiest thing is probably when you have the industry experience, probably you have seen them in
Yeah.
the other room, you've met them. But I wonder, like, for an
So
outsider, it's probably
yeah, so
challenging.
the Icon aircraft, one of the co-founders had the industry experience. No, I met here local entrepreneurs who didn't have that experience at all and was able to do something similar. And it requires a lot of research first on the entrepreneur part to be credible, especially when you're thinking of technology, science. So that entrepreneur had like extensive research, like spent so much time understanding the potential technology. So when we say, oh, the startup, I don't know, is 2-3 years old, but in reality the founder might have researched that idea for years. So I think this is important. And then, yeah, working on your network. Might start with a local network, but then if you can expand it. Something, because you said also have some practical advice. Something I want to add, it's important, um, especially in the US. So more and more employees have to sign those non-compete agreements when they start
Mhm.
working. So I would say that's a legal matter, really important to check if you want to hire on some managers, employees, even if a team. Um, it's like to check what type of contract they had signed with their previous employer. I don't know if that's something as big in Europe,
Yeah,
but
it is like, even in my consulting projects, I do sign sometimes NDA
mhm,
to or some other agreements on non-competition. That's yeah, a big thing since few years. So definitely something to consider. um I'm like, I wonder, because we started with some practical tips,
mhm,
and I know like this wasn't the only time when you were working on the startup success. So like, what other practical suggestions could you have for the founders for increasing our chances on the
mhm.
market?
I mean, okay, so maybe I like to give a little bit of perspective too. So I checked some statistics. So in the US, around like 15% of the workforce is self-employed.
Hmm.
No, in the 15%, only around like one third is going to go for an incorporated business. So that means that you're thinking the business is going to grow. You want to hire quite a few employees. So I think people also have to realize like what type of entrepreneurship they want to do. You can always have like a side activity. You don't always have to just think, oh, okay, it's going to be this major business that's going to grow. But so now, in general, when we think of self-employment, we still have around 50% of entrepreneurs would do it on their own. 50% would do it with people. And then I was curious, oh, if you look at, all kind of industries, so that might be, restaurants. Yeah, it could also be manufacturing, but cleaning, accounting, I mean, really all activities. 50% of the people still do it with their spouse. So
Mm.
I think it's interesting that and most private businesses are family businesses. So I would not just completely say, oh, we have to go no in one direction. I think you could still go the familiar road that has been going on for centuries. But then if these entrepreneurs are thinking of growing, I think then the hiring really good employees from the beginning is really important. So I can see two paths. So you can have the path where um, you're thinking of co-founders with whom you can work well and you are clear regarding the human capital they can bring, maybe also financial resources they can bring. Or you can maybe go another road where you are on your own. Maybe you bring a spouse or family member, but then think of like, okay, key employees that are going to make the business grow. And again, if that's the objective. So I think it's important to to have that broader picture in mind. Think of the type of entrepreneur one wants to be, and then think of the different options. Uh, Another thing I wanted to talk briefly about is understand the time commitment of the co-founders. A co-founder might still be a student, might maybe be a faculty, or they want to keep their day job. I think that's fine as long as there is a clear understanding of the commitment and the expectations,
Hmm.
both. both parties can have. Um, Again, like the YouTube, I like that example. So the YouTube example, so it was three founders, they worked together at PayPal, created YouTube, but one of them decided to go back to school and he was just an advisor to YouTube. And that was fine with the two other co-founders. His share of equity was a bit smaller. So when YouTube was then acquired by Google, didn't make as much money as the other two, but it was clear from the beginning that his role was a bit different because he wanted to go back to school. So I think a good understanding of commitment is important.
Yeah, this reminds me of like one day I've seen a model. It's called baking the pie model for like sharing equity in
Mhm.
startups. It is super complicated. So I was like aspiring for it in some ventures, but it's always hard. Basically, the idea is that we calculate um, very thoroughly the investment everyone does in the startup in terms of time, in terms of skills, in terms of money invested, and this all builds a pie. Like we all cook together, and then depending on how much value you put, that much of the pie is yours. So it's very liquid in terms of the contribution you had, because eventually you say, okay, I'm out, I'm done, but you still in the past provided some value, and then the newcomers can keep on providing new value, and the proportions change, but there is still a portion of the pie for you. So, but it's a topic probably for another conversation. Quite
Yeah, and
complicated.
I mean, I think what you mentioned also ties kind of the two topics because some co-founders might spend less and less time, and then you might have key employees who contribute a lot and actually gain more equity. So you might have employees who later on have more equity than one of the original co-founders.
Mhm.
I think there are different agreements possible. So, but yeah, these can
Yeah,
have
yeah.
those
It's
kind of situations.
I would actually conclude with this message. I think all in all, and tell me if you agree, but from what we are talking about, and from the examples, is that what is really important is, like, first off, make sure that you pick the right people. You have job hoppers, that's obvious, but then if you skip the part of setting this agreement at the beginning, probably that's the also critical point that we need to remember about, like, to really discuss what does this startup mean to every one of us, what is the commitment, what do we expect from each other.
Yes, yes. What are the expectations? And I think it's important to enjoy the different steps because most startups are not going to be the next Google. So you have to enjoy what you're doing and yeah, be clear on the expectations and commitments.
Yeah, it's also not that cool to be the next Google if you realize the drawbacks. So I think it's really, every startup is unique and it provides its own value to founders. Thank you very much. I have, let me
Thank you for
count,
listening.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 pages, 6.5 pages of
Wow.
notes. So there is a lot of insights I will need to digest. And one thing I wanted to share also with our viewers, the thing you linked to me, the EI exchange. So a platform I didn't know, and also I will take a look into a summary of some research papers in a more digestible way, and you can find this paper, Joining Forces: How Can Founding Members' Prior Experience, Variety and Shared Experience Increase Startup Survival, also summarized in there. Another resource to check for some quality scientific papers. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Radek. And yes, I hope the viewers enjoy it. I would say don't hesitate to follow up with Radek or even with myself. I'm sure you can find my email online.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.